Hello and a warm welcome. I'm Rahul Kanwal. You're watching the GST Masterclass on India Today. It's the one single piece of legislation that impacts your life much more than any other act ever. How ready is India for the rollout of the goods and services tax? How smooth will the rollout be? And most importantly, how does GST impact your life? In a moment from now, we'll be joined by the key architect who's responsible for rolling out the goods and services tax. Secretary in the Department of Financial Services, Hasmukh Hadia, will be with us. But before that, let me try and just get you to sit back and understand why the GST is so important for you.
Moving swiftly towards the One Nation, One Tax regime, Finance Minister at the GST Council of Ministers meet decided to place services under 4 slabs %.
GST itself, besides being a more efficient tax, is also going to be consumer friendly.
Railways and air transport have been fitted under the 5% category because their main input is petroleum, which is outside the GST ambit. It's a big cheer for the Aam Aadmi as nearly 81% of items will be under 18% tax bracket. The curtain has been lifted on rates for key items like milk, jaggery and cereals. Sugar, tea, coffee and edible oil and Indian sweets will be taxed under 5%. Toothpaste, hair oil, soaps will be cheaper as the rate has been lowered from 28% to 18%. Coal will be taxed at 5% against current 11.69%, which will directly impact electricity rates. Non-air-conditioned restaurants will attract a tax levy of 12%, whereas air-conditioned restaurants will fall under the 18% tax bracket. While education and healthcare have been exempted from the service list, e-retailers such as Flipkart and Snapdeal will have to pay GST.
हम ऐसा मान सकते हैं कि अब 1 जुलाई से देश के अंदर जीएसटी लागू हो जाएगा। देश के अंदर 29 राज्य हैं, 2 केंद्र शासित प्रदेश हैं और 1 केंद्र है। आज के समय में अगर कोई वस्तु इन सब स्थानों पर जाती है तो 32 कर लगाए जाते हैं। अब केवल एक ही कर लगाया जाएगा और मुझे लगता है कि एक अब उपभोक्ता को, व्यापारी दोनों को इससे लाभ होगा।
हमारा एक वेबसाइट होगा जिसमें सारे टैक्स पेयर्स आकर के उसमें अपना रिटर्न फाइल करेंगे, या जो नए लोग बिजनेस करना चाहते हैं वो अपना रजिस्ट्रेशन करवा सकेंगे, टैक्स का पेमेंट कर सकेंगे।
The government, however, has deferred the decision on tax rates for gold and cigarettes till its next meeting scheduled for 3rd of June. GST is set for a July 1st rollout and is expected to add 2% to the country's GDP.
So GST rollout on July 1st, and after the 2-day council meeting in Srinagar, they are almost at the finish line, but not quite there. Gold rate, BD agricultural equipment, tax slabs yet to be set for them. Also, July 1st rollout, will that be a possibility given the compliance hurdles in face of GST, or will it be pushed to September? With video journalist Dinesh Lal, this is Devina Gupta for India Today.
Joining me on the GST Masterclass for this special broadcast, Hasmukh Hadia, Secretary in the Department of Financial Services in the Finance Ministry. He is the key government brain responsible for execution of the goods and services tax. Joining me also, my colleagues. I want to begin by introducing Rajiv Dubey. He's the managing editor of Business Today magazine, and my colleague and India Today's business anchor, Devina Gupta. Welcome. I want to start by asking you, Mr. Hadia, welcome. It's very nice to see you outside the Finance Ministry North Block office and with us in the India Today Mediaplex. So welcome. There's a lot of stories we've been reading ever since the rates of the various categories of the GST products got decided. And the big question, of course, that everybody has in his mind is how confident is the government that when the GST rollout happens, it will be a smooth rollout? What kind of repercussions should people watching you on India Today be on the lookout for?
Well, I don't think that it is possible for any change to happen without problems. So smooth rollout is something which is we can hope for it, but there would be some initial disturbances we do expect, because everybody's life is getting changed. The tax officials way of doing business.
So what are the problems that you foresee, and how are you wargaming and preparing for them?
Well, the topmost thing for us is the consumer education, because without the consumer education, consumer being told as to how their life is getting affected or not getting affected, it will be an incomplete exercise, and the consumers themselves may resent it. So that's the top priority for us. The second, of course, is the compliance requirements under the thing. I don't think that the compliance requirement is very, very onerous. It's very, very small requirements, and any small businessman could easily deal with those compliance requirements. So that's something which is only a matter of education, and we are already holding a lot of classes for that. But other than these two, I don't expect any other glitches. The rates are already announced, so whatever upheaval has to take place, it should take place now rather than closer to the date.
This is the one legislation that impacts people's lives much more than anything else. And I want to start by taking a look possibly at some of the things that are becoming more expensive, and get you to explain how much more expensive do you see them becoming, and why should people, you're saying educating consumers is very important, so why should people be willing to pay more, for example, on their mobile bills, on renewal premium for life insurance policies, on Wi-Fi, DTH services, online booking of ticket, residential rent, healthcare, school fees, courier services, commuting by metro, rail becoming expensive, aerated drinks, cigarettes, tobacco products. Those are just some of the products that are becoming more expensive, and people will wonder and ask you, Mr. Adia, why should I pay more?
None of them is getting expensive, none of them, whatever list you read. For example, on mobile phone, the cell phone, the current incidence is 13.6%. We are making it 12% now. Current weighted average incidence of tax on mobile phone across the country is 13.6%. We are making it 12%. On the mobile bills, although the headline rate is changing from 15 to 18, but the benefit of input tax credit is being given to them. And there is, even in telecom, there are on an average some goods which are used, some equipment, some servers, some other facilities which are being used, on which they will get input tax credit now. On an average, there is a input tax credit, input tax cascading of 2.7%, which will now not happen. So your headline rate of 18 will almost become 15%. In 15%, we had a Swachh Bharat Cess, which was not available for input tax credit. So at every stage of service, you have to pay additional 5%. So it was like 0.5%. So it was like a turnover tax. So the actual incidence of service tax presently also is 16% almost, not 15%. And plus, now with the benefit of input tax credit given for all services, services will not become costlier. I can assure you that. This whole list goes actually. It is not possible for any of the service provider to increase any rate because of headline rate going up, because they are getting input tax credit. As far as lease on residential is concerned, it is exempt. We are going to charge service tax only on the commercial lease, not on the residential houses. So that was earlier also exempt. It will remain exempt now also. On metro, there is no tax. There is no service tax on metro travel. So why should metro travel become more expensive? I don't understand. So these are not correct. It is incorrect to say that all these services are getting costlier.
No, because this is where Rajiv comes in. Rajiv, there are a whole bunch of small traders, businessmen you speak to, even corporates that do this, provide these consultancy services. They've come up with various reports listing out the product categories they believe are becoming more expensive, and yet the government insisting and making the pains to try and reach out to people and tell them, don't panic, it's not going to be another demonetization.
So restaurant bills is one area where, Mr. Adia, if you would like to clarify, somebody who's bought air conditioners for the restaurant, how does he distribute the tax credit out into different bills to you, me and others, and things like that? And then another interesting thing is the stocks as of July 1. A lot of small businesses, a lot of shopkeepers are worried about what happens to the stocks as on July 1. How does he deal with that?
Well, on all services that anybody is giving, if there are any goods purchased, you will get input tax credit for it. So if a restaurant is purchasing 5 ACs, air conditioners, whatever GST is paid on the air conditioners, it will be available as credit. If you are buying tomato ketchups and if you have paid some taxes, it will be available in the bill. If you are buying aerated drinks and if there are GST paid on aerated drinks, it will be available for input tax credit. So with a 12% headline rate on non-AC restaurant, I think it's going to become very affordable for people, because now the restaurant will get input tax credit for all those goods. Now this is something which people have to understand. Only the headline rate may be going up, but that also not in all cases. But still the input tax credit will make it more affordable.
You know, Mr. Adia, Devina has just come back from Srinagar. She was with the finance minister as they put together the final touches on the GST product. The one very interesting thing, Devina, is the fact that even though there are some state governments being run by opposition leaders, at long last, this bill has been in the making since 2000. At long last, we are finally seeing convergence.
But not quite there as well, Rahul, because Mr. Adia was there, and you do know the opposition that you faced on the golds, for example, sir, because the tax rate there hasn't been decided. The Kerala finance minister is asking for a 5% tax rate on that, saying it should go up. Also, the other products like textile, agricultural equipment, still political consideration, marring a decision and a consensus on that.
Well, actually, it's not that there was a huge opposition to deciding rates on this. It's a sheer efficient utilization of time which we have done. So what we did was we the council decided, all right, these are some of the items which will require larger discussion. So let's keep it aside. In 1.5 days, we could clear out of 1200 items almost, all of them except the 6 items. So that's a big achievement. The council had no problem with some of the other items. After discussion, they adopted it. So it's only for the purpose of understanding the issue, looking at the various aspects of the issue, and then coming at a consensus. So that's something which we will do it on 3rd of June for rest of the commodities.
Can I ask just one question from the perspective of a common person? Taking the average expenditure that a person makes before GST comes into play and after, is life going to become, in your view, more expensive or cheaper?
Certainly not. It should become cheaper.
By what percentage point, you think?
Well, we have done some internal calculations, but that is subject to the fact that all reductions we have done in whichever commodity, all of them are passed down to the consumer. Subject to that happening, we would expect the inflation to go down by 2 percentage points.
Do you think that will be how big the difference will be, Rajiv?
Well, at least that's what the government has been saying. But I had, the consultants, the industry believes that there's going to be a period of at least a quarter where, because of the lack of input credit that they will be getting, they are accounting for, in fact, up to 5% to 7% higher working capital in their balance sheet, so that they can get that tax credit and that disruption can be taken care of. So it might be a period of a quarter or maybe 2 quarters of inflation, and maybe that it will settle down after that. What would you say?
Yeah, of course there would be temporary problems, but by end of the year everything should settle down and we should see the major benefit of price reduction.
I had
happening.
One point, Rahul, about cars, the taxation on cars, and I found it very intriguing. We know that government is trying to take people away from fossil fuel cars. I found it interesting that you've taxed electric cars at 12%, but it was counterintuitive almost for the industry to find that hybrid cars, hydrogen cars, are being taxed at 28% plus cess. That practically kills that sector.
Well, electric car is something which we would definitely like to promote. That's why it is at 12%. Yes. As far as hybrid car is concerned, there is an extra cost involved in having dual engine, one extra engine also, and that extra facility is required. In big cars where the cess rate is very high, it is 15% big car. In that segment only hybrid cars were coming, because the tax rate was very, very reasonable. So we thought that big car segment is something where small number of cars are made and they are being sold to rich people. That's something the council thought that maybe that segment we need not promote. But as far as small hybrid cars are concerned, there is a duty differential we have created. Now if you buy a small petrol car, you will have to pay 28 plus 1, 29, while in small hybrid car it will be 28%. If you buy a small diesel car, then you will have to pay 28 plus 3, but in hybrid it will be only 28%. So there is some 3%. Difference created there in small car, but big cars are far and few and also affordable by rich people. So that was the idea.
Devina.
So there have also been concerns raised about the cess structure that's been decided. Earlier you just had 6 to 8 items. Now we're looking at least 55 items that are under the cess. So that means when you say one nation, one tax, it's going on with cess, which is going from 3% to 290%. So although the tax slabs have been divided, but if you have more surcharges on each and every product, are we looking at the list of items increasing further?
No, actually there is no real increase in terms of type of item that we are cessing, we are putting cess on. There is no real increase in that. Unfortunately, even in the present excise duty regime, there are so many classifications of cigarettes and tobacco products, and all those classifications are being maintained in the cess regime. Because there are, as per length, as per the tobacco use, I mean there are so many classifications which are there in the existing excise regime. And the tax rate variation even now is so high. So we just wanted to follow a simple principle. Let's not unruffle all the feathers at one time. We could have made all the cess rates at highest rate in cigarettes, but we wanted to continue to fit it into the present slab. So we wanted to make it closer to the present incidence so that nothing changes, you know, to begin with.
So after your soda, after tobacco, after even the personal jet, do you look at more items now that could fall into this category?
It's only because there are too many classifications of tobacco and cigarette product. So item is only one, tobacco product. But there are 50 varieties of items. No, increases, I mean, we don't intend to increase it too much. But it all depends after 1 year, what is the compensation kitty we are getting out of this cess. And if you fall terribly short of it, maybe few items.
So 50,000 crore, you could increase the items, that means.
But that only if we need to, you know, we don't need to unnecessarily do it. Right now we are happy with this.
One of the big highlights of GST is supposed to be that it's a step further in the fight against black money after demonetization. Explain to our viewers how much of a dose against black money will GST be?
Well, actually, GST is an online system of taxation in which we want to create the audit trail of all the transactions which are taking place. So, if more and more goods and services come in the tax net, then of course the larger the turnover of goods and services which comes into the tax net, accordingly even the direct tax net should go up, you know. So the ultimate benefit will come to the country in terms of plugging all the loopholes in direct as well as indirect tax, and we should end up having more revenues.
One of the things that the small business is worried about, Mr. Adhia, is that wherever people who are not inputting their tax credit, or those who cannot input their tax credit, what happens to those businesses? You know, I can understand an ITC, it can almost force its suppliers to make sure that they are in the GSTN network. What about the guys who are not in the GSTN network? What happens to the tax credit for companies which are relying on them?
You mean transition provision?
Smaller businesses.
Transition provision. Yeah, of course. For them also we have said ki you would get 40% tax credit without voucher also. So those people who are unregistered dealers, they were not earlier paying taxes. Now they are coming into the tax net. So in transition we are saying ki in spite of your having no proof of having paid any excise or VAT, you can get 40% input tax credit in the GST of the existing stock as on 1st of July. But that transition rule is also under review, and the committee is working on it. There is a demand from the industry that 40% is also too less. Committee will look at it.
So what about the online space? Because 1% tax collected at source and paying tax upfront for the e-commerce companies, do you believe now they'll have to change the revenue model as well?
I don't think that will require them to change the revenue model. All we are saying is that if you are connected to a vendor on whose behalf you are collecting the payment as an aggregator, e-commerce aggregator, then you must deduct 1% out of the payment received by you, and then remaining you can transfer it to the vendor, and that 1% TCS, the credit of it will be given to that vendor.
You know, I want to take a question from Shriram Khanna. Shriram Khanna is one of India's best known consumer rights activists. He's with us on this broadcast. We're here listening to Hasmukh Adhia give the GST masterclass. Mr. Shriram Khanna, from a consumer's perspective, he says that life is going to become cheaper. He says if all the rates that have gone down are passed on to the consumer, inflation figures he believes could come down by 2%. How are you looking at GST, and what would you like to ask Mr. Adhia?
See, I like to mention two things. The first is about
Mr. Khanna, we hear you fine. Go ahead.
See, if Mr. Adya goes to a restaurant and he gets a bill after he has finished his meal, and he gets a bill and it says so much percent service tax, and when is he going to ask the restaurant owner to refund him the benefits of his tax credit?
It's a good question. Well, I don't think we are going to pass on the refund to the customer directly. In fact, if the restaurant owner is getting the input tax credit for all the inputs that he is using, he should first reduce his restaurant bill, and then on the reduced amount he should take 12%. That is the way to operate it.
Finally, Mr. Adya, one last question. You said that if all the tax cuts are passed on to the consumer, that if is a big if, then inflation figures go down by 2%. But we saw, for example, when RBI was cutting interest rates, they weren't all passed down to the consumer, at least not before demonetization. How do you ensure that what you're cutting is actually passed down to the consumer?
There are two ways of doing it, three ways of doing it. One is the competition should take care, and I believe that in most of the sectors will take care. The second is consumer education, so the consumers can force the vendors to explain why you are increasing the total price of the commodity when the actual tax incidence has not gone up. So consumer education is very important. And the last and the option which we would not like to use unnecessarily is the option of using the anti-profiteering clause also. And that is something which of course the business is quite scared of, but unfortunately in any new tax regime there would always be players who would like to profiteer out of it, and we have to have rules in place for that, which we plan to make as early as possible and put it in public domain.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. You're the man with the danda. You're the man that people are scared of. Your big brother in that sense, but he's saying he won't run the danda unless there's some kind of unscrupulous practice taking place. Hasmukh Adya, it's very nice, as I said, to see you outside your office in North Block and with us here in the India Today Mediaplex. And as you said, consumer education is the key. You can know that you're being conned only if you know what the tax rates are. Otherwise, you can be taken for a ride and you wouldn't be any the wiser. And it's important to make an effort to learn, because this is the one legislation that actually impacts your life much more than anything else. Hasmukh Adya, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks, Rajiv.
Thank you.
We'll have a lot more for you when we come back on the other side. Stay with us.